And how close in age was she to Carolyn?
4 years.
4 years.
So when she died at 19, Carolyn was just 15.
Did you feel that they had a special kind of communication?
Oh, yes. Carolyn was wonderful with her, and I think Hillary relied on Carolyn for an awful lot. You know, everybody said, oh, it was too bad Carolyn wasn't the older, so she, you know, and I said, well, the responsibility was on Carolyn to a certain extent, I'm sure, for a lot. And I think Hillary depended on her for a lot. And she was really very good with her. They had a room together, you know, and I'm sure there was and when she died so suddenly like that, it was very difficult. It was hard on Carolyn at that age, terrible. And I'm sure it affected her tremendously. You know, I think it makes people a lot more aware of people's problems and things if young people go through something like that. So I think it's one reason she's as nice with people and as she is.
I don't even really know how a parent copes with something like that.
Well, it's not easy. And, you know, we didn't realize what had caused it, for one thing. And then, well, you know, you keep thinking, what happened? And because I'd had other pregnancies, you know, and didn't seem to have any particular problem. And finally, when Hillary was about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old, something, I don't remember. We were having lunch one day, sitting at the lunch table with a sandwich or something, and John looked at me and he said, "You had German measles." And I said, "Oh, you're crazy, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did, and I'll tell you when." And he remembered that we had been at a cocktail party down on the lake at a carriage house that a young doctor had down on the lakefront there in Cleveland, and the young doctor was from the bomber plant. A real nice guy. And we went to this party, and I looked down at my arms, and they had this little red rash, you know.
Oh.
And I said, "Oh, look, everybody, everybody's going to be quarantined. I've got something, you know." And everybody just, you know, funny. I didn't feel bad. And this guy looked at me, and he said, "Skip, come here a minute." And he took me out in the other room, and he looked at down my throat, and he looked at my chest, and he said, "You've got German measles." And I said, "Oh, you're crazy." He said, "No, I'm not. There's a real epidemic." He said, "I've got men out at the bomber plant coming in every day." This was in April, and I was barely pregnant. I didn't even realize it myself. See, it was she was born in January.
Mm.
And that's when it's so dangerous, at the very early stages of pregnancy. It affects, there's almost 100% abnormalities from German measles at that early stage. Ears, hearts, and eyes.
So it affected both of ears and heart for Hillary.
And her eyes were not too good.
Mm.
So, you know, it's one of those things, as I say, in those days. Oh, it must be that's just the postman. This is a slow postman.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, some of them move faster than others. See? But, you know, as I say, I think back now because I guess you think you remember the bad times in your life better than the good times.
That's a good question. Do you think that's how it is for you?
Yes, in a way.
You remember the bad times more clearly?
Well, you remember the really times where as a child, my life was just one big long breeze, more or less, as I say. And as I say, this friend of mine always said, you know, I think everybody's life has a period that's better than others, or if you have a good childhood, then you don't have a good, you know, you either one or the other. You don't have, all of it isn't good. Very few people have a great life from the moment they're born until they die.
Right, right. Well, what period do you think you're in now?
Well, it's a period of learning to accept, I guess, that you're doing the best you can with what you've got, and to try to realize, I shake myself all the time and think, don't fuss, you're just luckier than most people.
In what respects?
Well, health-wise, for one thing, and that I have enough money to live on, and don't have to worry about finances particularly. I'm not wealthy, but you know, my wants are few, and I have my nice little house, and I have nice kids around, and my life is relatively easy to a certain extent. I think you just got to learn to be, you know, I get up out of bed in the morning and I'm just thankful I'm here. And just hope I don't hang on forever. You know, everybody does.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you have any, still, any ambitions?
No. Just to be the best grandmother and parent that's still left for me, and to be anything I can do for my children. That's about the most important thing, and to learn to live with all the peculiar things that go on in the world, and sometimes I'm glad I'm old.
And why is that?
Oh, I don't know. I hear all the such terrible things that go on in the world now. Maybe it's not any worse than ever, only somehow it seems to me that's all you ever hear about, don't you? Ever think that?
Yeah, sometimes it does seem that way.
And California, too. California's like a different country. You could come, you know, when I think of it now, you go back, even I bet when you go to Pittsburgh, you notice a big difference, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no question.
And, you know, to go back to the Midwest, like that little town where I came from, oh, good grief in the morning. Dullesville's nothing. And, you know, I have a few friends still there that I hear from, little Christmas notes, and we keep in touch to a certain extent. Not many, but a few friends. And, you know, Pat sent our birthday letter. Well, I play a lot of bridge, and book guild's still in existence, and she said, otherwise it's been a very dull winter. And I mean dull, you know. There's just not much to do there.
Right, right.
In this little town.
And that's
Church.
Woodville.
Yes. They're very, it's really rural.
Yeah.
When we first moved there, Carolyn was 2.
Oh.
I think she was just before she was 2 years old, I think. And they moved the whole plant. After the fiasco with the little furniture company, John went to work for Brush Beryllium. It's a company in Cleveland, and we knew the man that was one of the big wigs there. And they gave John a job as some kind of an engineer, whatever he was. And the damn plant burnt down in Lorain, Ohio. So they picked up everybody, and beryllium was used in the atomic bomb.
Oh.
And they were under contract to the government for all the beryllium they produced. So the government wanted the plant to be away from everything, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So they found this old plant in Lucky, Ohio, way out in the midst of nowhere, that had been something during the war. And they moved the whole plant down there. So everybody that worked for Brush Beryllium had to pick up and move to that area. And you could live in one of several little towns, so you pick and choose wherever you wanted to. And Woodville seemed to be about as good as any place. It was one of the more attractive looking little towns, and that's where we moved. Most people I knew moved to Woodville. Oh, some of them went to 2 or 3 of the other little towns. So, that's the way it went.
Well,
You can tell I coughed too. I talk too much.
Yeah.
When I talk a lot, then I cough.
Well, I'm asking you to do a lot of talking here, but you know what? I guess I think Carolyn asked me that she. I guess one of the things she said she didn't really know was that period of time, sort of after your marriage, with the first with the boys. I mean, I guess it's sort of a blank for her. You know what?
Well, we moved to.
You want to stop for a moment? Let me stop for a moment because you have a. I'm rolling here. Okay, I was just telling you about this restaurant, the Buckeye, and the reason why you came up in the conversation was because Julia is a great fan of onion rings.
Oh.
So onion rings. She ordered onion rings, and these onion rings came to the table. And I'm used to onion rings. They look like the things you take off the bell jars. You know, those big fat things. But no,
These are little slivers.
Little slivers. And Carolyn said, "My mother made those."
Yeah, well, we used at one time in my life, I had one of those deep fat fryers, one of those electrical ones.
Oh.
And I used to French fry onion rings, and I would slice an onion fairly thin, you know, and pull the rings out so they weren't thin. And you'd fry them in that. I remember we'd dip them in milk for a while, and it sort of took some of the pungency out of the onions, and then flour them and fry them in this French fryer. And they were delicious, and they were little thin ones, you know, not those big fat things.
Right, right.
They're very good that way.
Well,
I haven't done them in years.
Well, you know, we were just about to talk about that period of time before Carolyn was born, when it was just the two boys. And Ed, I mentioned the onion rings to Ed, and he had a, do you remember what the connection was with Ed and those onion rings?
No.
Apparently he used to have them special on his birthday.
Oh, well, they always had their birthday dinners.
Ah.
You know, everybody has, what would you like to eat for your birthday dinner? And we always laughed at Hillary. She wanted sauerkraut and hot dogs. She loved sauerkraut. And we always thought that was such a funny thing to be crazy about. But she liked, but I always, you know, that was one of the things you did for your birthday. You asked for, you got to eat what you wanted to have. No, I didn't remember he liked the onion rings that
Do you remember what John might have liked?
Haven't the foggiest notion.
Yeah, just curious. Well, what was life like when you just had the two boys?
Well, let's see. Seems like such a long time, you know. Seems until I moved. You know, I say there were some pretty bad years in there because I say we were jumped around from place to place because my husband would manage to drink himself out of a job someplace, and he always found another one. He could con anybody into anything, I guess. And we moved. We lived when I first was married. I say we moved to Atlanta. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, because John had gotten a job after he left. He decided, you know, he was going to leave Westinghouse and find himself a job someplace, and he went with Georgia Power Company. So he was in Atlanta for about a year before we were married. And everybody used to tease, you know, say, well, you better wear a red rose when you pick him up. You'll never know him, you know, and so forth. But we had, you know, made all the plans, and the engagement had been announced, and, you know, I had all these darn parties and so forth and so on. And so he came up, and we were married, and he had saved his money like crazy, and we went to New York and stayed at the Commonwealth Hotel. I can remember that. Commonwealth It's still, that hotel's still there. What the heck? That doesn't sound right. But anyhow, this great big fancy hotel. And then we took a boat from New York down to Charleston.
Oh.
Got off the boat in Charleston and ended up, you know, somehow Charleston, and then went to Atlanta. And we lived there for about a year or so. And we had a very gay time. Atlanta's a real party town.
Oh.
You know, bridge parties and country club stuff. And one of my friends from Pittsburgh, Polly, came down. She had a broken love affair, and she came down and parked on me and to get away from her horrible time, you know. And everybody wined and dined her, and she met all the good Southern boys, you know, and everything. Then we were moved to Knoxville. We moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and John went with Liberty Mutual Insurance Company as an engineer, but also as a salesman. And we moved to Knoxville. He was given the Knoxville office. A good friend of ours worked for this insurance company, and somehow, I don't remember, but anyhow. So we moved to Knoxville on my first anniversary. It was 1920. 29? October? Was I married in 28? Guess I have to stop and think. I think I was married in 28. I was married in October. Anyhow, we moved to Knoxville. And that's a university town. University of Tennessee is there. And it's a pretty gay little town, too, if you get in with the right people. And we went to all the damn university, some of the fraternity parties. We'd, chaperone, and everybody went up to the mountains. You're right there at the mountains, and you can go up to the mountains all the time. And there was a young matron's cotillion, and we played bridge. Nobody had any kids. Oh, it was, lots of fun. We had a good time there, too. And then John was born in Knoxville, and so was Ted. And we moved to, John was given the Louisville office, which was a big office. That was a branch office. He was given the Louisville office. And so we moved to Louisville, Kentucky when Ted was just a baby. So he was born in September. And I think we moved up there in the middle of winter, practically December or January.
And was it already that you were moving because of the drinking?
No.
I didn't think so.
No. When my husband was a good salesman, he could sell anybody anything. And when he was when he was right, he could really go to town. And the moment he'd start drinking, he'd always end up, being very successful. But anyway, we moved to Louisville. He was given this great big office with a lot of people under him, and that was his downfall. That was bad for him.
Why?
I don't know. It just was. He was too much. It went again. I don't know. I just think it was more than he knew how to handle. Not that he couldn't handle the business end of it or the people end of it, but I think it just gave him too much. Made him feel too smart, too something, And then he started drinking again. So.
Oh, it was just then.
Well, he had quit for about a year. Then he started again, and the whole time we were in Louisville. Oh, we moved up there. He found a place for us to live without me even going there. I hated the damn town.
Oh.
We moved there in the middle of the winter, and it was raining. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And that was the year they had the Louisville flood. They had a real flood. The Durden River, that's the Ohio River there, and it's huge.
Oh, I've been there. I know how wide it is.
And the river came up into the whole town. The Brown Hotel lobby had water in it. And it was before they had built all the, whatever they built.
Mm-hmm.
And the office buildings, everybody couldn't get downtown. It was just a mess. And we had this house out from town. It was an old house, but it was large, fairly large. And I had a black couple. We had brought, Rebecca had worked for me in Knoxville. Everybody had help, everybody. So Rebecca, I said, Rebecca, would you like to go to Louisville? Yes, but I can't go without, not George, what the devil was his name? Will. Or Ed remembers him vividly. So John said, well, if we can find a place for them to live over the garage or something, no reason why we can't take him, and Will can work for you and do what he wants when you need him, and the rest of the time he can pick up odd jobs around the neighborhood. And he was a nice little nigger. In those days, believe me, he was just a little black nigger. One of the best-natured men in the world, couldn't read or write. And Rebecca was a good cook, ugly little black woman. But anyhow, we moved to Louisville. And there was an old garage out back that had living quarters over the top, so they could live out there. But before we could get them back out there, it was pouring down rain. And we had to have them in the house with us because the place hadn't been fixed and there was a leak in the roof or something. So anyhow, finally, it rained so bad and it flooded so bad you didn't have any water or electricity. And the water would be turned on for an hour a day, and you'd fill the bathtubs and all the receptacles and things you could find. And the electricity, we had, just candles and stuff. It was awful. So finally, John said, Ted was just a baby, diapers and all the rest of the mess, and everybody didn't have all these kind of diapers you can go to the grocery stores and buy. So we all had to take typhoid shots. You could see wiggle tails in the water. That is the truth. Wonder everybody didn't get sick.
Wow.
And so John, they were taking women and children, flying them out of the city on a priority base. He went out somehow. He'd done some flying around with a lot on for business. So they called us one night and said they could take us the next day. And I took the two boys and Rebecca, this little black woman, and left Will with John in the house. And Rebecca and I and the two boys flew, I think we went to Indianapolis, and then on another time went to Pittsburgh. And I stayed there for a while till things settled down in Louisville. And in the meantime, John got all the people from his office came out to our house and worked out there. Stenographers, you know, and everybody. And Will took care of everybody. He cooked. He was a short order cook, so he had a great time because everybody tipped him, you know, and he thought it was just wonderful. So anyhow, so I stayed in Pittsburgh until things straightened out and then went back to Louisville. But I never liked that town after that. It just was a terrible start, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And how long were you there then eventually?
Todd was just a little boy when we left. He was 3 or 4, something like that. 3, maybe 4. I don't remember exactly.
A few years is all it was.
They sent us to New York.
Oh.
Well, John, the company realized John had been having problems, you know. And they were very good to him. Well, he had problems, so I suppose that the office wasn't running properly. I don't really remember.
How aware were you of that, though?
I don't know what I did in Louisville because I didn't know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet a lot of people.
Right.
I don't know what the hell I did do with myself all the time because I had help. I didn't have, you know, housework to do or anything much. I can't remember doing much of anything, to be honest. We didn't go to a church. We went down to one of the Episcopal churches, the big cathedral church, I think, now and then, but we didn't have a church affiliation particularly. And we used to go out at night places, you know, go have dinner places and stuff like that, but we didn't really. Some of the boys from the office we knew pretty well. I can remember a couple of them fairly well. But most of them were younger than we were and weren't married. Mm. I just don't remember much social life really in Louisville.
Well, and did you have kind of premonition that this job would be a problem for your husband?
I thought they were very good to put up with him, you know, because I don't think he ever actually neglected the business. I don't remember why, but they must have. Anyhow, they sent us to New York, where they could keep.
If you know, what I'm curious about is not so much the details of what he did, but I'm just kind of curious what your experience was or your perception of it. How did it seem? I mean, when you heard that he was getting this kind of job, that is with a lot of people and so on, did you have a feeling even from the beginning it might be a problem?
No, I was just glad for his promotion. You know.
So when do you think it? I mean, now today when you look back on it, you say, you know, that was the kind of job that wasn't good for him. When do you think
I don't think I realized that at the time.
No.
I really don't. No, not really. That life we had in Louisville was, we were spending way too much money, more money than he made probably. He had no good financial sense. He's a typical bots. If there's money in their pocket, they spend it. His sister's the same thing. They were brought up that way.
And what were you spending your money on?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. He probably spent a lot of his on liquor. I don't know.
So money was kind of going away.
I guess. I don't remember running up a bunch of debts or anything particular.
You personally weren't spending much?
No.
But it was going somewhere.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. And we went to New York, as I say, from Louisville, and I think they sent him there because they felt they could keep an eye on things, you know, and he hated it.
Hated New York.
Oh, well, you know, it was so different than doing business in the South.
Oh, yeah.
And we lived out on Long Island, in Merrick, Long Island. John found a house out there.
Now, this was about what year? I mean, Ed was 4-something years old.
Ed was born in 36. It was during the 30s. And, you know, the Depression years, my husband was never really out of a job.
It sounds like, no.
He never was, really. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember them as Depression years.
But did you have, when these things would come up where there would be either in this early stage something was not quite right in his work, or later when it was explicitly a drinking problem. Were you angry about that?
I was probably more unhappy than I was angry. I was distressed to the point, and I didn't know what. I guess I didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody to go to for any help.
You were on your own.
And I certainly would never have gone to my parents for help. Never. Maybe my father, I might have, but I would never have asked Mother.
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't think she would have ever understood at all. I think my father would have probably been a lot more understanding.
And yet you didn't contact them.
No. Well, they were in Pittsburgh.
Sure, it wasn't
They
easy.
weren't right that close, you know. And I didn't have any intimate friends close by, you know. We had moved odds and ends of places so that I didn't have any intimate friends there. And he managed to get himself out of that job in New York. They finally fired him.
Oh, they did.
And we decided we'd better go back. It was his decision too, and probably mine, that we'd go back south again. And I loved Knoxville so, and we all had liked Knoxville. So back to Knoxville we went, and John got himself another job through some friends, some insurance business. I can't even remember who. And we didn't stay there terribly long. The boys were little. Ed wasn't even in school.
Mm-hmm.
But John was in the first grade.
So you weren't in New York very long at all then?
Oh,
A year?
year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived out in Long Island. Of course, John had to take the train into the city, and he just hated it. And I can't say I blamed him.
Mm-hmm.
Merrick, Long Island was, we lived in a neighborhood that, I guess most of them were Jewish. The nicest thing I remember is Jones Beach.
Oh.
It wasn't too terribly far, you know. We used to go down to the beach over weekends, early Saturday morning, and take the boys. And we had a couple other couples, both of them from the South, that we knew that had children too. And we'd all go to the beach, you know, and things like that. So that part of it was nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then we went back to Knoxville, and that didn't last very long either. John was really drinking then. And he had a man that he knew. You know, he could con anybody, I guess. In Kingsport, Tennessee, that was up from Knoxville, Charlie Edwards that had a big insurance agency.
Oh.
And my husband had known Charlie Edwards, I guess, before. Sold him some insurance or something. Charlie Edwards gave John a job in Kingsport. So to Kingsport we moved.
Uh-huh.
The boys were little.
And now where was Kingsport?
Oh, it's not terribly far from Knoxville.
Oh, I
It's
see.
that area of Tennessee, middle eastern part of Tennessee. Sort of a nice little town.
Mm-hmm.
And he was still pouring the liquor down. He poured himself out. He just drank himself out of the job.
Oh.
And Charlie Edwards was really good to John. He was really good to him. Gave him this job, and you know, we could have been there and had a nice life. My oldest John, I think he was in first grade now. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I don't even remember how we did it, but we moved to Memphis. John got himself a job with somebody else.
Wow.
You know, he could always, so see, there was a series there where we just jumped around.
Yes.
And I'm sure I was unhappy. You know, you were, you didn't know what was coming next.
Right.
And we went to Memphis, another town I didn't like.
Oh, you didn't care for Memphis.
Yeah. And we lasted there how long? He got himself, he was still drinking.
Mm.
Then finally, how did he, somehow, he went with Fisher Body.
Oh.
And that was, we stayed there, and he quit drinking again. All on his own, see. And when he quit drinking, he could really go to town. So he quit drinking, and that's when they sent him to Bay Village, see.
Oh.
Because he was doing a whizzy job with Fisher Body. He was an engineer on the,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so we went to Bay Village, see, from there. And then I go to Bay Village, and Denver didn't get pregnant again. And that was, you know, there was Hillary coming along, and somebody says probably the change of water. But I got pregnant again. And so Hillary was born in Cleveland. And, you know, then, you know, so that the boys were growing up They got jumped around an awful lot. And poor
Yes.
John, I think John felt it probably more than Ted.
He was how much older?
3 years.
3 years. So.
Enough so that he was very aware of it, you know. John was, from the very beginning, was, you know, he was a very talented, you could tell John was going to be an artist of some sort. From the time he was a little bitty fella.
Oh.
I remember the first picture I ever had that he ever drew that I remember, I hung on to it for years, were the horses out at the track in Louisville.
Oh, at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, they had taken, John and Will had taken the boys out to watch the horses work out in the morning or something, you know. And he drew this picture of these horses and the jockeys, and gosh, you could see the horses running. And here he was in kindergarten or, you know, something. It was pretty remarkable at the time.
Wow.
So he always, you know, had that sort of talent. And he was always a very difficult child.
Oh, he was?
He's my difficult child.
Oh.
If anybody, he's mellowed. John's not near as bad as he used to be. His marriage was something else.
Oh, so you not just as a child, but throughout his life?
Yeah, he was always a rather temperamental child.
Oh.
Always.
And how much do you think this uprootedness?
Oh, I think it had a lot of, I think it did a lot to him. He says he doesn't remember. He's just blocked a lot of it out.
Do you think so?
I said, you know, I'm sure you know, you really hold this against your father and that against your father and so forth. He said, no, that's not true because I just don't remember these things. So he blocked it out.
Mm-hmm.
But they loved Bay Village.
They
The
did.
boys loved it.
That was on the water.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this: what at the time, were you aware of any anger that the boys felt towards their father, or disappointment that they felt?
I think I was aware of John's, yes, to a certain extent. I don't think there was anything you could do about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't call my husband a good father. He wasn't a bad father as far as being unpleasant. But when I look at the way Ray is with his kids, you know, he knocks himself out. He stands on his head for them. He'll do anything for those kids. My husband never did. He was kind to them. We took them places. We did things, but not like Ray does. And Carolyn says Ray is very conscious that he wants to be a good father, you know.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't think it ever entered my husband's head that he should be a good father. He was a father, and that was it, period, you know.
Right.
And he knew they were his responsibility to a certain extent and so forth.
Well,
But I don't remember ever getting, you know, I remember thinking sometimes I just should get up and get out of this whole situation. But then I thought, what the hell am I going to do? Where am I going? Back to Pittsburgh with my family? Never. You know, I don't know what people do now when they break up a family. And if I had left my husband, he'd have gone to pieces for sure. There wouldn't have been anything left. He would never have been able to pick himself up by himself. I don't think.
And were you afraid for him in that way?
Oh, yeah, I just didn't think he would ever survive if I took off. I really don't. I think I probably thought of it, never very seriously. I probably never even spoke it to anybody. So I don't know, you know.
You didn't really have anybody to speak to, I guess.
No! You don't have anybody to talk to.
Mm-mm.
Like these girls go to this meditation group, and they all know everybody's problems and all these things. See, we didn't have therapists all over the place that everybody could go talk to.
Right.
There was no, I never heard of such a thing.
No, I'm sure.
And
Well-
now they're a dime a dozen. Every time you turn around, somebody's going to a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a good thing. It probably is.
Yeah, it seems like it might have been good to have someone to talk to at that time.
Sure, probably.
Did you ever think of even just ending your life?
Oh, no.
I didn't get that impression, but I just
No,
thought,
never.
I was curious.
Oh, no, I don't think so. No!
No.
Heavens, no. I guess I always felt responsible for my own children, too. That I felt that somebody had to be there for them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never have done that.
Right.
And I loved my children. I mean, I still love children, and I love babies. Just love babies. Crazy about them. I'm one of these old ladies that stops all the babies in the grocery stores and looks at them, you know. And I'd love to go work at one of the hospitals and just sit there and hold the babies like they do some places. That would suit me fine.
Well, have you ever looked into doing that?
Well, they don't do it out here at Marin General.
Oh, they don't?
No, they have pink ladies or whatever they are that run around the hospital, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But you're on your feet all the time doing that.
Oh, no, that's hard
And
work.
Kathy, you know, my daughter-in-law from Berkeley, works at Alta Bates, you know, and she at one time she was the preemie intensive care in the intensive care unit. Well, she doesn't work at the hospital anymore. She's she visits the homes and follows up on these babies or something. But she said, Skip, you ought to be over here. She said, we could really use you. They go have people come in to just give the babies some love or whatever one calls it, and I would like to do that. That would suit me fine.
Well, how about Kaiser?
I don't think they do it up there. I doubt.
Because I understood that they had very good birthing
But I
stuff.
doubt if they do that. I don't know. Kathy, you know they must have so many preemie babies and stuff over at Alta Bates.
Yeah, that's of course, that's true.
Yeah, they probably do, you know, and I would like that.
Well, what has kept you from doing that?
Well, I'm not going to go clear to Berkeley to do it.
Too
No,
much
thank
drive.
you.
You don't drive
Oh,
that much anymore.
Well, when I first moved here, I drove to Berkeley lots of times, but I don't anymore. I don't get out on the highways any more than I can help it. I sat there while I was getting gas this morning and looked at the cars going down that highway at the Chevron station. My God, they're cars, and they look like they're going so fast. And I'm just not comfortable on the highway anymore. I just think, you know, when you get to be as old as I am, I'm a good driver. But I don't figure that they gave me a license until '97, for heaven's sakes here. Which seems pretty ridiculous. But, so, you know, you need something to do with you. And I'd like to do something like that. I know a girl that's a surgical nurse up here at Marin General, but Sue says they don't do that. You know, I mean, that's just not one of the things they do up here. I don't know, maybe their obstetrical unit isn't that big up here. I don't really
But
know.
that's great that that's something you'd love to do.
Oh, I like babies. I just love babies.
That would be a tremendous contribution.
Well, I'd like doing it, you know. It's nice to do something you like.
Yeah, of course. Well, let me ask you something. So that was a lot about that period of time before. And
The boys had, you know, when you think about it, they really had some pretty up and down existence there for a while. And, you know, I'm sure they were aware of it. Certainly John was. And that year or so that we were in Kingsport was terrible. I realized how much John was drinking. And there wasn't much I could do about it. You know, he'd bring the bottle, he'd hide the bottles around.
Sure.
They all do that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'd get hold of them and pour it down the sink, which is just useless, you know.
Yeah.
So that it makes, that makes a real mishmash of your life. It really is terrible.
Well,
He was worse there, seems to me, and in Memphis than almost any place. And then by the time we got to Bay Village, he had quit for, you know, and then he started in again, but somehow I don't remember it being quite as bad, although it probably was, but I don't remember it being quite as bad. I don't remember how when he got into AA. It was while we were in Bay Village.
Well, you know, it seems like you were a very romantic couple in a lot of ways.
Well, you know, he was a very charming man.
Right. I mean, you
Well, I was very happy, and I loved him, and I don't think he did any womanizing. If he did, I never found out about it. He may have,
But I mean, it seems like the two of you were very physically
yeah,
attractive.
we were happy and physically happy, and there was my marriage was fine as far as I was concerned, except for the drinking. We'd have been fine, you know.
Yeah.
It really ruins your life.
Well, that's what I was curious. I mean, did it affect you physically, your physical relationships with him?
Not particularly, no. They always tell you that it does, but I don't ever remember that part of it.
No?
If it did, no, I really don't think it did, really. I've always heard that.
Yeah, I would have thought that. And so when you were pregnant with Hillary, it wasn't because you had been abstaining, but you
Oh,
still,
no.
It was just a surprise.
It was just one of those surprises, you know,
Right.
It does happen. And
So there were a lot of connections between the two of you. I mean, drinking or no drinking, you really...
Oh, yeah. I was never really unhappy, except for the fact, as I say, that he was making a mess of his life and consequently mine.
Right.
And there was not much you could do about it. And then after the fact that you knew what he could do about it, he knew too Then by that time, I think sometimes you get pretty angry that he hasn't enough sense to quit, you know, and why they go back to it.
Yeah.
And then when he got sick, I remember the day he came home from the plant. He'd been at work, and he came home, and he hadn't been feeling bad particularly, but he said, the doctor at the plant said, John, I think you better go in and see a thyroid man. I don't like the way this would have felt or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went in, sent him into this specialist in Toledo, and this man didn't even, before he ever had any more tests or anything, he said, I'm sure you've got thyroid cancer. And he said, you're going to have to go someplace to have this taken care of, and we don't have the equipment here to treat you.
Wow.
And he said, you'll either have to go to Columbus or Cleveland. That was right at the beginning when they were using the cobalt bomb, remember?
I do remember the term cobalt, yeah, for my family.
So we went up to, John decided he'd go to Cleveland. It was somehow more familiar to us than Columbus. So he went to Cleveland, and he went to Cleveland Clinic, and George Cryle, Dr. Cryle, who was one of the founders of the clinic, operated on this thyroid cancer, and it was malignant and removed the damn thing. And John came home, and he was fine. Well, full of pep, vim, and vigor, and it was all over with, you know, and it never entered his head, you know, that this wasn't going to be just fun. He was an optimist by nature, I guess. And they didn't expect him to live 6 months, but they didn't tell him.
Oh.
But they told me.
Oh, they did.
Oh, yeah. They didn't tell me, but my doctor in Woodville, who got the records, you know, told me. He came by, and I knew him. And he said, Skip, somebody's got to know, and I think you should know. They don't expect John to live 6 months. And I said, I don't believe you. He said, well, I hate to tell you, but that's what they say. He lived 10 years. And I never told anybody.
No?
No! Who could I tell?
Yeah.
I just lived with it, and he got along fine. You know, he was feeling great. And he had the surgery early summer, May, I don't know, June, I don't remember. And Christmas, we'd bought this old house. He loved working on this old house, you know, doing all kinds of, oh, we pulled out walls, we did over floors, we built he loved doing it. He'd come home from work and get into his old clothes and go to work. And he was very good at doing things like that. And he was working on the old floors. He was going to strip the floors, and we were going to use the wide planks and all this. And he got this horrible pain. I don't remember where it was, his back or something. Well, I called the man in our little doctor, and I told Dr. Drossel, and he came over, and of course I knew what he thought right away was, here it is. So this was Christmas time. They sent him to Toledo to the hospital. They went over from top to bottom, and they couldn't find anything. So then he went back to Cleveland in an ambulance.
Oh.
They just zoomed him back to Cleveland. He said, we went through Bay Village, you know. He said, I told him to put the siren on, you know, so we went through Bay. And when they got up there, they found a hole in his leg, up nearly to the hip, in the long bone.
Wow.
About this big. And it had probably been there in the first place, but somebody had missed it in the x-rays, say.
Oh.
So they went in. They gave him, I don't know, x-ray treatment. Sent him home on crutches for it to rest up, and then took him back in a couple of months and put in a steel plate on that leg. That was the first surgery after the thyroid. And, you know, he came home from that and threw the crutches away in no time flat. They told him, your leg's fine now, it's stronger than the other one. And he went back to work. And after that, you know, something was always cropping up. I can't even remember all the things. He had more surgeries, part of a lung, and he's still smoking.
Oh.
Oh, sure.
And so, in the way that you were carrying fear.
Well, sure, you carry a terrible burden, but after a while you begin to think, well, those guys don't know what they're talking about. But I didn't ever expect him to, you know, there was enough period between these bouts of recurrent malignancies so that, and, you know, oh God, he had all kinds of medication. They gave him all this stuff at the clinic, all kinds of things for him to sleep with and so forth that kept him sort of doped up. At home, he was fine when he went back to work. It was at home that you'd see the results of this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because underneath he was probably just as nervous as the rest of us, but, you know, he didn't let anybody else.
He didn't show it.
No, he didn't tell anybody else, show anybody else. We were the ones that got the burden of it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, just gradually over the years, he worked till in about 2 months before he died.
And when you say we were the ones who got the burden, who do you mean we?
And the whole family, I think, felt it.
Meaning that you and your children?
Yeah.
Right.
Because I probably protected the kids.
Yes. How did you do that?
I don't know, just tried to live as normal a life. And my little Hillary was crazy about her father. He was the only one that really she looked like a bot, sort of.
Oh.
And I think he felt, you know, the responsibility of this handicapped child, and consequently probably gave her more affection and love than he did to anybody else. She had a very bad collapse and the heart just went out. I mean, even after the heart surgery. And she died on the table in the hospital.
And she died in January?
In January.
And he died in March.
So
she died in
before
surgery?
He did. Well, not surgery. They were running one of those angio things or something.
Oh, yes.
I don't remember. And the heart just gave out. And he was home sick.
And you
he
were
was
with
home.
her?
And I had gone in to spend the night at the nurse's home or something, so I'd be there for her in the morning. And I was over in the hospital waiting for her while they were doing these tests. It was awful. And I heard the doctor calling for somebody else, and first thing you know, they were calling for me, and I went to the doctor's office, and it was not the man that had done her surgery. He had left the city, and this was another doctor that had her records. A young Dr. Ford, his name was, very nice. And I went back, and he just looked at me. And I said, "Is it bad?" And he said, "Pretty bad." And finally, after practically asking him, she died on the table. And he couldn't even tell me. You know, he just had an awful time. I felt he had time getting it out, you know.
But you knew.
Well, you know, and finally I said, he just said, "She's gone." That's all. She died right there on the table. So, you know, I had to go home and face a husband who was not very well, and everybody. It was awful. It was a really bad period. I had a couple of pretty bad months there. I don't know how you survive these things.
No, I don't.
So I say, it sounds like a soap opera. Ted was in New York. John and Linda were back in Woodville.
Living with you then?
Not with me, but there's an apartment upstairs in this big old house, and they were up there. And Linda was a big help. Linda and I have gone through a lot together. You've never met her, have you? Well, she's a strange woman. They were a terrible married couple, but she's very smart. And she backed me up pretty well, you know, because when Hillary died that day, here I was, and I called Linda. She was working in the city at this company, and I called and she came out and got me home, you know. And because I had to come home and tell John and Carolyn, and then, you know, I have to go through all this business, the funerals and all the rest. It's a terrible thing to go through when it's sudden like that. My brother and his wife came up from Pittsburgh, and, you know, everybody in the little town was wonderful, of course. The whole damn high school came to the service, because Hillary was still in she was a senior in high school. And was really emotional. It was terrible. It was bad weather. Oh, it was awful. Snow and ice and carrying on. I can still remember it. It was ghastly. Ted came home from New York, you know, and it was a pretty horrible occasion. We should have had the camera. Anyhow, but those things are all, you know. I don't know, everybody has, I think sometimes I've had more than most, and then again I think, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, as I say, but when the early part of my life was pretty good.
Yeah.
It was probably a lot more fun in games than these kids can look back on.
Yeah.
I'm not sorry about it.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I think back now, and I think we had a lot more fun than these kids do now. Oodles more fun.
Why do you say
Might have
that?
been silly. Oh, I don't know. Some of these kids now, everybody's so serious and they worry so about going to school and their grades have to be this and that and the others. If they've got any sense, they spend all their time worrying about what college they're going to get into. And I don't know. And they all, I don't know, they just don't seem to have the same kind of, they don't have carefree fun like we used to. And ours was probably pretty stupid, but it was carefree. I don't regret it for 1 minute. They were the Charleston crazy days and the, you know, the roaring 20s. And I guess they really were for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, you know, are there any things that you do have regrets about when you think about it?
Well, not particularly. I don't regret having that handicapped child. I think that she was very good for all of us in lots of ways. It made all of us, you know, learn to be. I regret it because of the problems she had, not more for any other reason, you know.
Right.
Not particularly. I look back and wonder how many things I would have done differently. I don't know.
Nothing comes to mind?
Not particularly. Not really. Not really.
Let's take a break.
Yeah, your throat's more tired than mine, probably.
I'm going to just, I'm running to the end of this tape, so I'm going to change
Well,
it.
you don't need another tape. This is enough.
Well, I had a couple things I wanted to ask
All
you,
right,
if you don't mind.
I'd rather you would ask me.
Yeah, I will.
I'll keep quiet.
Okay, just a second.
That
let me-
sounds hard for me to do, but I can do it.